Hello, Country Meadows. We're going to continue reading the last lecture, and it's a book, and we have them available in the Dynamic Living Office if you're interested in reading them. But I'll read it to you, and we're actually in chapter 8. This is my third time reading, and we're on 8. It's about an individual that he had a terminal illness, pancreatic cancer. He was a college professor. In the college, Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh invited him back to give one last lecture. In the lecture, he's thinking about all the dreams that he had fulfilled in his life, and then in the book he covers a lot of them. So let me start in chapter 8. You'll find me under V. I live in the computer age, and I love it here. I have a long embraced pixels, multi-screen workstations, and the information superhighway. I really can picture a paperless world, and yet I grew up in a very different place. When I was born in 1960, paper was where great knowledge was recorded. In my house, all through the 1960s and 1970s, our family worshipped the World Book Encyclopedia. The photos, the maps, the flags of different countries, the handy sidebars revealing each state's population, motto, and average elevation. I didn't read every word of every volume of the World Book, but I gave it a shot. I was fascinated by how it all came together. Who wrote that section on aardvarks? How that must have been to have a World Book editor's call and say, "You know aardvarks better than anyone. Would you write an entry for us?" Then there was the Z volume. Who was the person deemed enough of a Zulu expert to create that entry? Was he or she a Zulu? My parents were very frugal. Unlike many Americans, they would never buy anything for the purpose of impressing other people or as kind of luxury for themselves. But they happily bought the World Book, spending a princely sum at the time, because by doing so, they were giving the gift of knowledge to me and my sister. They also ordered the annual companion volumes. Each year, a new volume of breakthroughs and current events would arrive, labeled 1970, 1971, 1972, and 1973. I couldn't wait to read them. These annual volumes came with stickers, referencing entries in the original, alphabetically World Books. My job was to attach those stickers on the appropriate pages, and I took that responsibility seriously. I was helping out to chronicle history and science for anyone who opened those encyclopedias in the future. Given how I cherished the World Book, one of my childhood dreams was to be a contributor. But it's not like you can call World Book headquarters in Chicago and suggest yourself. The World Book has to find you. A few years ago, believe it or not, the call finally came. It turned out that somehow, by my career up to that time, had turned me into exactly the sort of expert that the World Book felt comfortable badgering. It didn't think I was the most important virtual reality expert in the world. That person was too busy for them to approach. But me, I was in the mid-range level, just respectable enough, but not so famous that I had to turn them down. Would you like to write our new entry on virtual reality? They asked. I couldn't tell them that I've been waiting all my life for this call. All I could say was, yes, of course. I wrote the entry, and I included a photo of my student, Colleen Kelleher, wearing a virtual reality headset. No editor would ever question what I wrote, but I assume that's the World Book way. They pick an expert and trust that the expert won't abuse the privilege. I have not bought the latest set of World Books. In fact, I've been selected to be an author in the World Book. I now believe that Wikipedia is a perfectly fine source for your information because I know what the quality control is for real encyclopedias. But sometimes when I'm in a library with the kids, I still can't resist looking up V, Virtual Reality, by yours truly, and letting them have a look. Their dad made it. Chapter 9. And before we get there, what if World Book, encyclopedia, called you? What sort of information do you know about enough to write an article in the World Book? Think about that for a time. Chapter 9. A skill set called leadership. Like countless American nerds born in 1960, I spent part of my childhood dreaming of being Captain James T. Kirk, the commander of the Starship Enterprise. I didn't see myself as Captain Polsh, that's his name. I imagined a world where I actually got to be Captain Kirk. For ambitious young boys with a scientific bent, there could be no greater role model than James T. Kirk of Star Trek. In fact, I seriously believe that I had become a better teacher and colleague, maybe even a better husband, by watching Kirk run the Enterprise. Think about it. If you've seen the TV show, you know that Kirk was not the smartest guy on the ship. Mr. Spock, his first officer, was the always logical intelligence on board. Dr. McCoy had all the medical knowledge available to mankind in 2260. Scotty was the chief engineer who had the technical know-how to keep that ship running, even when it was under attack by aliens. So, what was Kurt's skill set? Why did he get to climb on board the Enterprise and run it? The answer? There is this skill set called leadership. I learned so much by watching this guy in action. He was the distilled essence of the dynamic manager, a guy who knew how to delegate, had the passion to inspire, and look good in what he wore to work. He never professed to have skills greater than his subordinates. He acknowledged that they knew what they were doing in their domains, but he established the vision, the tone. He was in charge of morale. On top of that, Kurt had the romantic chops to woo women in every galaxy he visited. Picture me at home watching TV, a 10-year-old in glasses. Every time Kirk showed up on the screen, he was like a Greek god to me. And he had the coolest damn toys. When I was a kid, I thought it was fascinating that he could be on some planet and he had this Star Trek communicator device that led him to talk to people back on the ship. I now walk around with one in my pocket. Who remembers that it was Kurt who introduced us to this cell phone? A few years ago, I got a call on my communicator device from a Pittsburgh author named Chip Walter. He was co-writing a book with William Shatner, Kurt, about how scientific breakthroughs first imagined on Star Trek foreshadowed today's technological advancements. Captain Kirk wanted to visit my virtual reality lab at Carnegie Mellon. Granted, my childhood dream was to be Kurt, but I still considered it a dream realized when Shatner showed up. It's cool to meet your boyhood idol, but it's almost indescribable cooler when he comes to you to see cool stuff you're doing in your lab. My students and I worked around the clock to build a virtual reality that would resemble the bridge of the Enterprise. When Shatner arrived, we put this bulky head-mounted display on him. It had a screen inside, and as he turned his head, he could immerse himself in a 360-degree image of his old ship. Wow, you even had your turbo lift doors, he said. We had a surprise for him, too. Red alert sirens. Without missing a beat, he balked, "We're under attack." Shatner stayed for 3 hours and asked tons of questions. A colleague later said to me, he just kept asking and asking. He doesn't seem to get it. But I was hugely impressed. Shatner was the ultimate example of a man who knew what he didn't know. He was perfectly willing to admit it. Didn't want to leave until he understood. That's heroic to me. I wish every grad student had that attitude. During my cancer treatments, when I was told that only 4% of pancreatic cancer patients live 5 years, a line from the Star Trek movie, The Wrath of Khan, came into my head. In the film, Starfleet cadets are faced with a simulated training scenario where no matter what they do, their entire crew is killed. The film explains that when Kurt was a cadet, he reprogrammed his simulation because he didn't believe in a no-win scenario. Over the years, some of my sophisticated academic colleagues had turned up their noses at my Star Trek infatuation. But from the start, it never failed to stand me in good stead. After Shatner learned of my diagnosis, he sent me a photo of himself as Kurt. On it, he wrote, "I don't believe in no-win scenarios." And there's a picture of it. I don't believe in no-win scenarios. Chapter 10, Winning Big. One of my earliest childhood dreams was to be the coolest guy at any amusement park or carnival I visited. I always knew exactly how that kind of coolness was achieved. The coolest guy was always easy to spot. He was the one walking around with the largest stuffed animal. You ever seen that in a carnival? People walking around with these big stuffed animals? It didn't matter if he was a puffed up analyst or he was some sort of nerd who couldn't get his arms around it. If he had the biggest stuffed animal, then he was the coolest guy at the carnival. My dad subscribed to the same belief. He felt naked on a Ferris wheel if he didn't have a huge noodly one bear or ape on his hip. Given the competitiveness of our family, midway games became a battle. Which one of us could capture the largest beast in the stuffed animal kingdom? Have you ever walked around a carnival with a giant stuffed animal? Have you ever watched how people look at you and envy you? Have you ever used a stuffed animal to woo a woman? I have, and I married her. Giant stuffed animals have played a role in my life from the start. There was a time when I was 3 years old and my sister was 5. We were in a store's department, toy department, and my father said he'd buy us any one item if we could agree on it and share it. We looked around and around, and eventually we looked up and saw on the highest shelf a giant stuffed rabbit. "We'll take that," my sister said. It's probably the most expensive item in the toy department. But my father was a man of his word, and so he bought it for us. He likely figured it was a good investment. A home could always use another giant stuffed animal. As I reached adulthood and kept showing up with more and more bigger stuffed animals, my father suspected that I was paying people off. He assumed that I was waiting for winners over by the squirt guns and then slipping at 50 to some guy who didn't realize how a giant stuffed animal could change the world's perception of him. But I never paid for a stuffed animal. And I never cheated. Okay, I admit that I leaned. That's the only way to do it at the ring toss. I'm a leaner, but not a cheater. I did, however, do a lot of my winning out of view of my family. And I know that increased suspicions. But I found the best way to bag stuffed animals is without the pressure of a family audience. I also didn't want anyone to know just how long it took me to be successful. Tenacity is a virtue, but it's not always crucial for everyone to observe how hard you work at something. I am prepared now to reveal that there are 2 secrets to winning stuffed animals: long arms and a small amount of income. And I am blessed to have in life to have both. And here he has a picture of a big stuffed animal on his shoulder. I talk about my stuffed animals in my last lecture and showed photos of them. I could predict what the tech-savvy cynics were thinking. In this age of digital manipulation, images, maybe those stuffed bears weren't really in the pictures with me. Or maybe I sweet talked the actual winners into letting me to have a photo taken next to their prizes. How in this age of cynicism could I convince my audience that I really won these things? Well, I would show them the actual stuffed animals. And so I had some of my students walking in from the wings of the stage, each carrying a giant stuffed animal I won over the years. I don't need these trophies anymore. And although I know my wife loved this stuffed bear I hung in her office when we were courting, 3 children later, she doesn't want an army of them cluttering up our new house. They were leaking styrofoam beads that were making their way into the Cleo's mouth. I knew that if I kept the stuffed animals, someday Jay would be calling Goodwill and saying, take them away. Or worse, feeling she couldn't. That's why I had decided Why don't I just give them to friends? And so once they were lined up on stage, I announced anyone who would like a piece of me at the end of this, feel free to come up and take a bear. First come, first served. The giant stuffed animals all found homes quickly. A few days later, I learned that one of the animals had been taken by a Carnegie Mellon student who, like me, has cancer. After the lecture, she walked up, selected the giant elephant. I love the symbolism of that. She got the elephant in the room. Chapter 11, the happiest place on earth. In 1969, when I was 8 years old, my family went on a cross-country trip to see Disneyland. It was an absolute quest, and once we got there, I was just in awe of the place. It was the coolest environment I ever been in. As I stood in line with all the other kids, all I could think of was, I can't wait to make stuff like this. 2 decades later, when I got my PhD in computer science from Carnegie Mellon, I thought they made me infinitely qualified to do anything. So I dashed off my letters of application to Walt Disney Imagery, and they sent me some of the nicest go-to-hell letters I ever received. They said they had reviewed my application and they didn't have any positions which require your particular qualifications. Nothing. This is a company famous for hiring armies of people to sweep the streets. Disney had nothing for me, not even a broom. So that was a setback. But I kept my mantra in mind. The brick walls are there for a reason. They're not there to keep us out. The brick walls are to give us a chance to show how badly we want something. Fast forward to 1995, I become a professor at the University of Virginia, and I helped to build a system called virtual reality on $5 a day. That was at a time when virtual reality experts were insisting they needed $500,000 to do anything. And my colleagues and I did our own low version of Hewlett-Packard Garage Thing and hacked together a working low-budget virtual reality system. People in the computer science world thought this was pretty great. Not too long after, I learned that Disney Imagery was working on a virtual reality project. It was top secret. It was an Aladdin attraction that would attract people to a ride, a magic carpet. I called Disney and explained that I was a virtual reality researcher looking for information on it. He was ridiculously persistent. I was ridiculously persistent. And I kept getting passed on until I was connected to a guy named Joe Snobby. He happened to be a brilliant imager running the team. I felt as if I had called the White House and put through to the president. After we chatted for a while, I told John I'd be coming to California. Could we get together? Truth was, if he said yes, the only reason I'd be coming would be to see him. And I'd gone to Neptune to see him. He told me, okay, if I was coming anyway, we could have lunch. Before going to see him, I did 80 hours of homework. I asked all the virtual reality hotshots I knew to share their thoughts and questions about this Disney project. As a result, when I finally met John, he was wooed by how prepared I was. It's easy to look smart when you're parroting smart people. Then at the end of the lunch, I made the ask. I have a sabbatical coming up, I said. What's that, he asked. which was my first hint of academic entertainment culture clash I'll be facing. After explaining the concept of sabbaticals, he thought it would be a fine idea to have me spend mine with his team. The deal was if I come for 6 months, work on a project, publish a paper about it. I was thrilled. I was almost unheard of for Imaging to invite an academic like me inside their secretive operation. The only problem? I needed permission from my bosses to take this kind of oddball sabbatical. Well, every Disney story needs a villain. Mine happened to be a certain dean from the University of Virginia. Dean Wormer, as Jay dubbed him in homage to the film Animal House, was concerned that Disney would suck all this intellectual property out of my head that rightfully belongs to the university. He argued against my doing it. I asked him, do you think this is a good idea at all? And he said, I have no idea if it's a good idea. It was proof that sometimes the most impenetrable brick walls are made of flesh. Because I was getting nowhere with him, I took my case to the dean of sponsored research. I asked him, do you think it's a good idea that I do this? And he answered, I don't have enough information to say, but I do know that one of my star faculty members is in my office. And he's really excited. So tell me more. Now here's a lesson for managers and administrators. Both deans said the same thing. They didn't know if this sabbatical was a good idea, but think about how differently they said it. I ended up being allowed to take that sabbatical. And it was a fantasy come true. In fact, I have a confession. This is exactly how geeky I am. Soon after arriving in California, I hopped into my convertible, drove over to the Imaging headquarters. It was a hot summer night, and I had the soundtrack to Disney's The Lion King blasting on my stereo. Tears actually began streaming down my face as I drove past the building. Here I was, the grown-up version of that wide-eyed 8-year-old at Disneyland. I had finally arrived. I was an imager. And that ends our today. Next time we'll look at part 3, and it's about adventures and lessons learned, and starting with chapter 12. Thank you for joining with me. I hope you are hearing this and it's beneficial to you. And we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.